Hello, my name is Maria Schmitz, and I'm back today to talk about Olive Senior and her role model, Pablo Neruda. Olive Senior's ode to Pablo Neruda extends over several pages, as she obviously muses over a role model and his use of the word thread of poetry. I have tried to distill the essence of her praise in this video. But first, let me introduce the object of her admiration. He's also well known on the world stage, a Chilean poet and Nobel Prize winner. Nancy Snyder writes, if you want to read one of the world's best poets, Pablo Neruda is a perfect place to start. And obviously, Olive Senior has also read Neruda. He's recognized as one of the great 20th century poets. His life was dominated by poetry, politics, diplomacy, and temporary exile from his native Chile. In 1971, Neruda was the recipient of the Nobel Prize for Literature. And in his acceptance speech, he said, a poet is at the same time a force for solidarity and for solitude. Neruda wrote nearly 3,500 poems in a wide range of genres: historical epics, passionate love poems, distinctive odes, political manifestos, surrealist poems, and a prose autobiography. Another great Latin American writer, Federico Garcia Lorca, described Neruda in 1934, saying, "And I tell you that you should open yourselves to hearing an authentic poet, of the kind whose bodily senses were shaped in a world that is not our own and that few people are able to perceive. A poet closer to death than philosophy, closer to pain than to intelligence, closer to blood than ink." He's said to have written with fire. So now, after Lorna Goodison's mango of poetry, let us examine what Neruda means by the thread of poetry, as Olive Senior did. This poem is a letter to Neruda, and like a dialogue, as Olive Senior spins the metaphors and returns to them ever so often, it is most likely inspired by Neruda's ode to thread. Thread is used 31 times in this poem, which is about the creative genius, a poem about poetry, therefore. In part 1, Olive Senior feels alienated in the North. She's afraid of losing the thread in the foreign environment in which her subject matter does not resonate. I want to pay homage, but here in the North, separated by a continent from Santiago, Isla Negra, or my own island home, so far from the sea I can't strike the right chord. The measure that I tread moves no one else. I find myself drifting and wordless. This prompts her to take another look at what Neruda meant by the thread of poetry. So I turn to find again something you said about grasping poetry like thread. Here it is. You must spin it, fly a thread and climb it. This isn't a matter of deliberation, it's an order. In part 2, it becomes clear that the poet sees her craft as her mission and obligation. Here's how I see it. This thread is one that crosses your path like the spider's web. You walk through unaware, the great spider still clings to it. So now, spider clings to you, my friend. This is not an accident. You have been chosen spider's apprentice, to master language, as trickster, to spin and weave tales, to prophesy and heal. This is almost like a soliloquy. She sees herself as an intermediary and messenger, the go-between serving earth and sky, sometimes the messenger left dangling. If she doesn't use her talent, Neruda might one day rebuke her for not repaying your debt of poetry to the people who forged you your good life with their blood and their sweat. All you had to do was weave the thread, using his words, into cloth for those who have only rags, nets for fishermen, and a flag for each and every one. Poetry is compelling. After you have taken the thread you cannot refuse. You must choose how to handle it. Here's the real trick. And no one ever tells you this. The thread of poetry, to safely travel, the knot of yourself you must first unravel. You can make your way through the needle's eye, pulled up by the thread of your poem, dragged down by the weight of words waiting to be strung. The real apprenticeship has begun. In part 4, Senior joins the dots and uses the rosary beads to pray for those to whom she feels indebted. So this knot that I have been feeling, this pearl of anxiety, I'll make part of this rosary of the Alpha and Omega. And further down, the beads telling not decades but centuries. In response to Neruda's initial, "you must spin it, fly a thread and climb it," she now responds, "I've had to weave a cloth to wrap it all up in, a bundle for carrying, for I'm traveling too, but not flying, too much salt in my veins. I've been seeking a thread to tie up the bundle which has been growing unwieldy with the cries and the whispers of the ones I can't name, the lost ones, the limboed, the uncared for, the unloved, the mortified, the discarded, the disappeared, all resting uneasy on my conscience. Along with the poems I failed to deliver or neglected to write, and not saying, I love you enough. Yes, we each have our measure and our burden to carry, but sometimes the cries are so piercing we are silenced. And there are times like this when, having crossed the abyss, I want to feel free to fly kites, if I wish, or just to dangle from a thread like the spider. She only has one metaphor for the pirates and cutthroats. But the ones that will never die out are too gelatinous to be strung, being seaweed themselves like floating sargassos on the currents of life, spirit pirates with no roots of their own, the same ones who forged the chains of indenture, brokered sugar canes sweetened with slave blood, their tentacles still as far-reaching and fatal as the entanglements of the constrictor of vegetal growth, the strangler fig. In part 6 of the poem, Olive Senior makes a pun on gender. I wanted more than woman's knotted portion, so I refused to learn the way of thread. Sewing, embroidery, darning, weaving, tapestry, knitting, or crochet do not appear on my CV. She has made it and recognized her creative genius. But look at this. In the sky, a kite still aloft, and the one holding the thread is me. She comes to terms with her calling and legacy, with the order of which Neruda had spoken. This isn't a matter of for deliberation, it's an order. So she writes, maybe I'll accept, after all, my commission as apprentice spider who spins from her gut the threads for flying, for tying up words that spilled, hanging out tales long unspoken, reeling in songs, casting off dances, and perhaps for binding up wounds, addressing the healing power of poetry as a side effect. In part 7, she reaffirms that her trickster powers, another metaphor for the creative genius, are evolving. I'm learning like you, Pablo Neruda, veteran tightrope walker, to swing more easily between joy and obligation. She ends her section with effusive thanks to her like-minded colleague. So, to wrap it up, let's have a look at part 8. Part 8 of this poem is, to my mind, a reaffirmation of belief, which is not as constricting as the views of either Nietzsche or Kandinsky. Olive Senior agrees with her Latin American counterpart that creative genius is boundless as the universe out there. God is dead, wrote Nietzsche. Heaven is empty, wrote Kandinsky. God is dead. You, Pablo Neruda, saw instead the heavens unfastened and open.